Hello, swampUP 2020. I am Valarie Regas, and I am coming at you from Atlanta, Georgia, here in the sunny southern US. I'm so excited to share this talk with you. The shiny new Agile. Oops, we're Waterfall again. I know that when people make like a top 10 list of like the sexiest DevOps subjects they can imagine, Agile methodology maybe doesn't rank up there in the top few, but to me, it's actually quite sexy because I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I have a really varied background. I've had a few different careers in the last couple of decades I've been working, and I've only been in tech for 3 years. And so I've had to learn a lot in a very short period of time. And fortunately for me, my company has been through a few different, merging of teams and restructuring. And I've gotten to see many, many different ways to do Agile. And I've gotten to see how different teams of different sizes with different goals work. And when I started really digging into what is Agile, like why do we even do this? It really spoke to my heart because you see, I did 5 years as a stay-at-home mom. And while that was not the job for me, it's the hardest job in the whole world. And if you have a stay-at-home partner, you worship them, buy them pretty things, and verbally praise them. It is the hardest job in the world. It was too hard for me. But I learned a lot about efficiency and how to automate one's life and a lot about conflict resolution, actually. Anyway, I learned a great many things, and Agile, as a part of an overall DevOps culture, really spoke to me. So we're going to just jump right in and start off by talking about like what is Agile and what was Waterfall. Now, again, I'm sort of new to tech. And so I've read about Waterfall and how back in the dark ages, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there was this method of development. And so I really like this blog I read. It was actually a JFrog blog comparing waterfall development to rocket launches, right? And so when you are creating a rocket and you'd like to launch it, you undertake this, this task systematically in a very linear fashion, very left to right, first step, second step, third step. And everything moves towards this end goal where you have this huge rocket launch. Whereas Agile, if done correctly, is more like the modern day airline industry, wherein they are constantly having takeoffs of airplanes. And every single time they do a flight, if you have a really good flight crew, they are analyzing what went well that flight, what went poorly, what can we learn from it, what can we do better next time. In a nutshell, that is the difference between waterfall and Agile methodologies. There's a lot to be said for people who happen to think linearly, but I will tell you that everything I've read about from people working in waterfall environments, unfortunately, the problem is that you're working on way too big a change for way too long. It's very difficult to adapt to user and customer needs, right? So this is why Agile is desirable. But what in the heck does this have to do with DevOps culture? Well, what are the goals in DevOps? We're looking for CI/CD first and foremost, right? We want to be constantly, continuously delivering good code that's tested in an automated fashion. But why? We talk a lot about like what we're trying to accomplish, but why? Well, here's the why. The why is time. As it turns out, I know that money matters. I know that you want to make money for your company, and I know that you want a paycheck, and I know that your company cares about its bottom line. But money comes and goes. Time is all we really have that is of value. Every single piece in the puzzle that is DevOps culture is geared towards giving us more time. The whole reason to be continuously integrating new, clean, small increment of change code that is thoroughly tested is so that if we need to push new code to production at 4:45 on a Friday, we still get to enjoy our weekend. As it turns out, we should be working to live, not living to work, right? This is why for a DevOps conference, an Agile talk makes a lot of sense. Agile is one means of implementing time-saving efficiency measures that give us more time to do things that actually matter to us. So, how are we going to do this talk? So I was thinking I would just, sort of share my experiences, but I don't like that because that's just one perspective. I am a huge proponent of diversity and inclusion because it adds perspectives. The more different kinds of voices you have at the table, the more unique experiences are shared, the greater your depth of knowledge. So I created this anonymous survey and I sent it out to a few communities of which I'm a member. And I'm very fortunate. I've gotten back responses at this point from 4 countries, a whole host of different experience levels. Some, one person is a 25-year veteran architect. We've got some people in their first year at their first role in tech. We've got developers, product, design, you name it. I was very fortunate to get mixed responses and a whole lot of voices at the table. So you're going to get advice that's not necessarily coming from me. A lot of it comes from the horror stories, the absolute horror stories that people shared that I think you could learn from. So every team is different. How can I possibly assess your team's needs? Spoiler alert, I cannot, right? I don't know what your team needs. So instead of telling you what to do, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And if you're a leader, take stock of your team. Ask yourself these questions and really analyze how your team's doing within these different metrics that I'm going to propose. And for each metric, I'm going to give you some advice. Hey, if you find that your team is maybe not doing so great in this one particular area, here are some things that other people say have worked for them, right? We're going to go through this list and it's up to you. If you are a team member and not a leader yet, take notes. Critically analyze your team. Add value to your team by going to your leader, maybe next week, and saying, hey, I've identified some gaps in efficiency, and I think we could implement these things. Stand out. You'll be a leader one day. So I think we're just going to jump right in. We're going to jump right into it. And I'm going to lob you a little bit of a softball. Has your team achieved continuous delivery of good software? Well, what is good software, first of all? Good software works and it meets your customers' needs. Well, how do we get there, right? There were a lot of horror stories shared about crappy software. And I think at the end of the day, whatever else we discuss, this is the thing that the metric against which Agile is measured. Are you delivering good software? And if you're DevOps oriented, are you continuously delivering good software? Almost every horror story that had to do with delivering crap software centered around huge sweeping feature changes, right? So if you find that you're having a difficult time delivering good software, how big are the changes you're making? The smaller the increment of change, the easier to test, the easier to control, the easier to revert, right? This makes sense. I cannot emphasize when it comes to producing good software, the importance of testing. There were a lot of horror stories from developers who basically said, I would like to practice test-driven development, but with what time? I'm on a small team, we're under deadline. And when you're a developer and you've got a rush to push out a feature, what goes first? Testing goes first. It's really difficult to write the test ahead of the code, or in tandem at least, if you are under such crazy deadlines. And we've all been there. There's deadlines. It happens. So with testing, obviously, you're going to want to have automated testing in your pipeline. I really love that JFrog has pipeline and it's integrated into platform. There's all sorts of different ways to automate tests at that level, but give your developers the time they need to actually practice test-driven development, because from the responses I got, developers want to do it. It's just time is kind of a thing. One of my favorite pieces of advice that actually came out of this, sort of testing and making sure we're delivering good software, not crap software, came in the form of involve your product and salespeople with your developers to discuss testing needs. And by that, I mean, ask them from a customer perspective, if they're asking you to produce a new feature, within that feature, what is the worst thing that could break? What is the worst outcome from this feature? What is the thing that could happen that could go wrong that would most upset our customer, make them lose faith in us? Like, what is the worst thing we could give you? Then write your test against that first. If you're limited for test time especially, ask product and salespeople, because they know the customers better than the dev team ever will, as it turns out. Ask them, what do we really need to prioritize? Not just making sure that something functions, but like, what is the worst case scenario? And if we deliver this, it's going to be considered crap software, even though other things work. Really like that piece of advice. I say that this was kind of a softball in the first one because it's this huge generalized question. We're about to get a little bit more specific. Hold on. Does your team welcome changes in requirements even late in the dev process? All right. So this is a big one. Being able to shift, the word agile, right? It by default sort of implies a certain amount of agility in your process, right? So there were lots of horror stories about not being able to change anything on short notice. The worst one, I think, actually came from the world of consultancy. The person shared that their client had what ended up accidentally being a 2-day deployment process every time because there was only one person allowed to handle configuration management. I think they had like a hybrid on-prem cloud situation where only one person had access to each environment. And just on and on because of so many people being necessary and they could, only one person can do this task. It turned into middle of the night, a whole bunch of people on a call to deploy something, but it took 2 days to get there. QA had to sign off on a bunch of things. And so what they said would happen is they'd go to push just like a hot fix, just a little tiny increment of change, doing the right thing. They're doing the best. Except business, knowing how long this process takes, would try to push through features real fast, like the same deployment. So suddenly what started as a small increment of change and a good idea becomes pushing way too much at the same time, which becomes crap software, which ends in rollbacks. Now you've got multiple team members losing sleep. This is no bueno, right? This is not what we're going for here. So analyze your processes and can your team shift? If you're in the middle of feature development and you find out that maybe the direction you're heading isn't quite what the customer wants, do something else. Can you? Okay, so only you know if your team can shift late in the development process. But one great piece of advice that I got was involve product and sales in a constant feedback loop. I really love one of the things that our leadership does is involve product in our dev environment. So we have people who aren't developers with access to our dev environment that they can play around and fiddle with things as features are being developed. So if our developers are sort of moving in a direction that, we thought was in keeping with what we were given, they can say, oh, hey, actually, if further conversation with the customer, this is not exactly what they were thinking. Can we shift a little? And now you haven't spent, a week working on a feature and you've released it and it's not what they want. They're in there all the time and they're able to give it this constant feedback loop. Part of being able to change on a moment's notice is constant feedback, right? It's almost like touching a stove. Obviously you touch it, ow, hot. Ooh, okay, I'm gonna make that change. But, if you're not getting that instant feedback, you might leave your hand there. Make sense? Constant feedback from product and sales is a great way to make sure that you're not moving in the wrong direction. And if you need to shift, you can, and you're not losing out on a whole bunch of work that's already done. Which brings me to this question. Do your business and development teams work together, but like really work together? Yeah, maybe y'all work in the same building, maybe you have coffee chats together, but are you really working together? Lots of horror stories came out in this survey about sales teams basically offering up features under deadlines that were completely unrealistic for the dev team as structured. Lots of different complaints about that. Well, I don't believe for a minute that there's anyone in sales who's genuinely interested in signing a contract with a customer with a deadline and a feature set and not delivering. They want to deliver, right? They don't want their dev team to not be able to do that. How do they know what you can do? Cross-functional teams. Have cross-functional teams where someone representative of the different entities within your organization. And depending on what product you create and depending on your team needs, that might look like you've got some developers, a mix of different skill sets, and then maybe you have a product owner and maybe someone from marketing might need to be in there. It just depends on how big your company is and what your team is working on. But if sales, product, business, marketing, all of them, if someone from those different entities is involved in the process, if they're at stand up with you more days than not, and they're hearing how the development team works, and they're really intimately familiar with how much work your team can handle and on what timeline, They are far less likely to sign you up for a deadline that's unrealistic. And they're more likely to long-term retain happy customers. This is a win for everybody. Cross-functional teams are the way to go. Okay, now so this is a big one. This is a big chunk of information, but critically look at your teams. And are your teams built around motivated people? And do you trust those people to make good choices? And do you give them the tools they need to implement those choices? This is a lot. I mean, that's a lot, right? As a leader, look at your team. Do you trust all of your team members? And if you don't trust them, why are they your team? If you're a team member, do you feel trusted by your leader? And if not, why are you on that team? This is a big one. When we are coworkers and teammates, true teammates, there has to be a level of trust. I mean, I'm not saying you should do like surprise trust falls around the office, surprise trust fall, but like, you should have a certain amount of trust for one another. There was one horror story that came out from a gentleman who basically his company's sprint structure was so rigid that when he identified a backlog ticket that was slated for the next sprint and hadn't gone through the really rigorous ticket writing process that they had, he went to his boss and said, "Hey, I know it's not scheduled for this sprint, but I've got time. I know how to fix it. I don't really need to do all this work on the ticket because I know exactly what needs to happen. Can I just fix it?" I was told, "No, that's next sprint." Okay, but like that's a person who can fix a problem that exists, and why would you not trust them to fix the problem? And now this employee has gotten the message, I'm not trusted to do my job. How can they possibly invest in the company's success and future if they're not even trusted to do their job, right? This is a big deal. I would say from a people management perspective, let your teams sort of self-organize around the features and their skill sets and the things that make them passionate. I mean, obviously, like so many failed marriages, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you're going to fail. If you let your teams organize around the features that really excite them, they're not going to think of it as drudge work. It's going to be an exciting challenge to solve. Trust them to know which features they should be put on. Trust them to know where their skill sets are strong and which skills they need to develop and work accordingly. Now, they have to have proper tools. There was an awful horror story from someone who shared that basically in the first 2 months of this new company, they finally settled in on their 5th laptop because the first 4 couldn't be used for development. They didn't have compute resources. So like RAM and memory weren't sufficient to do anything that needed to be done. It would just constantly crash. And then the company kept trying to refurb and give back. And number 5, it was the 5th attempt. So now we have a resource who's literally not accomplished what they could have for 2 months. I know that not every company can afford to give every single person the fanciest machine ever. But as a leader, are you making sure that your employees have the tools they need? You trust them? They've made good choices? They've got work to do. Can they do that work? Do they have the tools they need? This is an important one. And if they don't, what can you do about it? Okay. Is your team communicating face-to-face? All right, this is a hard one. So I started writing this talk pre-pandemic. And this one looked a little bit different. But I stand by face-to-face communication being even more important now. Even more important. Okay, so here's the thing. Written communication, there is such a high likelihood of misinterpretation, it's not even funny. I personally try to read every email, every Slack message, every text, and assume positive intent. Now, this has come from a lifetime of assuming negative intent and having unnecessary fights. Learn from my mistakes. Assume positive intent. However, written format is important. I mean, we use Slack, we use email, we use these tools to communicate with our teammates. When it goes wrong, it goes very, very wrong. In the age of COVID, we're on a lot of Zoom and WebEx meetings, right? We're in Google Hangouts, we're online with our coworkers. Turn your video on. And I'm not asking, I'm telling right now, turn your video on. Here's the thing. The same sentence, even with vocal inflection, in the absence of body language and facial expression, can be very differently interpreted. It can go from, wow, that's a really good idea, to, wow, that's a really good idea, to, wow, it's a really good idea. Seeing my face made a difference. Vocal inflection gave it away a little. Facial expressions really make it. Turn your video on. And I hear you. We all have like the COVID mullet. At least I do. I'm too afraid to go get a haircut. That's right. We've all got like our terrible hair, and I don't know about y'all, but at home I'm wearing the elastic waist pants. You know the ones. Yeah. My Eaton pants. And, whatever old like baggy hoodie with the curry stain. Yeah, that one. It doesn't matter. No one cares. Most people are so concerned with their own appearance. They're not really looking at what you're wearing. They're not looking at your COVID beard. They don't care. They want to see your face because we've all been isolated for a long time. And as it turns out, we're teammates, and seeing our teammates' faces and getting a feel for their emotions is a part of the human experience. And when people feel more human and connected, they work better together. This is a big one. It's even more important now that we can't physically be together the same way that we were. This is important. Turn on your video. I promise you're gorgeous. And if you're not, put on a hat and maybe, do what I do. Keep the elastic waist pants on, maybe throw on a blouse, pretend. Just don't stand up. Do your processes lead to sustainable development? Okay, now this is a big one. Sustainable development. What do I mean by that? I mean the pace at which your team is expected to develop. Is it reasonable and sustainable long term? So we had kind of opposite ends of the spectrum horror stories. The vast majority were on the end of, I work all weekend, I work all night, I'm constantly under pressure, I never have any time for myself. This was the majority. I did have this one neat outlier though on the opposite end. This one person reported that at their company, the sprint structure is so rigid and there's so many restrictions as to what can be taken off of the backlog and when and how, that they found themselves every sprint, at least the last day, if not the last 2 days, with nothing to do. Well, that's a waste of resource. Clearly, something's gone wrong in the planning. That's a wasted resource. But the vast majority of people are overworked. So I would like to make this clear. Deadlines happen. Last minute projects happen. Things that need to be done right this minute happen. And so there's going to be times where people are under deadline and they're working crazy hours. What can you do to stop this from being the norm? Well, first of all, obviously some people just work that way. They're workaholics and it's a part of who they are. Don't praise them for it. Don't say, wow, you're here every weekend. Good for you. No, don't be an enabler. Identify it and try to help them find some balance so you don't have a burnt out employee who doesn't want to deliver good software because they lose passion. If you have people who aren't just natural workaholics and they're working around the clock, why? Do you need more resources on your team? Like, is there just way too much work for the number of people you have? Are you forever signing up for unrealistic feature releases? Are you in some way enabling this by always having just too much? Identify why you have a team member who doesn't want to be working around the clock but feels they have to. Because again, they're going to get burnt out, lose passion, and start making crap software. If you have a deadline where people are legitimately for a short term required to work that way to get something out, make a point to identify that this was a one-off. This is not how it needs to be 24/7 by doing things like, hey, you know what, everyone, don't come in until noon tomorrow. Y'all just met this awesome deadline. Let's just take a half a day tomorrow, or throw some sort of party to celebrate that successful delivery. And maybe everyone has a day where they're technically in the office, but there's not a lot of pressure and they can just relax, maybe go home early. Emphasize that that's not sustainable. That pace of 24/7 work is how people have heart attacks at 45. You don't want that. It's very expensive, especially if you're paying for their health insurance. Really. Identify these sorts of problems. Stop them. The development pace needs to be sustainable over the average. Let's look at our processes. Are all of your processes necessary? So in this realm, the number one complaint was meetings. People talking about having average of 3 to 4 hours a day in meetings. So here's the problem. Even if all of those meetings were clumped together and you've got a 9-hour workday, you could probably eat at some point. You've got like 5 hours to work now if you've got 3 hours of meetings. So time management experts tend to agree that like if you actually work like focused, heads down, knuckled up, working, right, for 4 hours a day, you're doing great because it's difficult to do that, right? If you got meetings spread out through the day, it's not going to happen. Okay, that looks like, okay, I've got to work. Okay. It takes me 15 minutes to get into the zone, and now I'm there. All right, I'm working in ding meeting. Okay. Well, why did I go to that meeting? That could have been an email. Okay. All right, it's going to take me another 15 minutes. Hey, how are you? Yeah, I'd love to grab a cup of coffee. Okay, no, I'm going to work now. And ding, meeting. That's a lot. I'm not saying that meetings are the devil. They need to happen. Especially, I'm going to harp on collaboration and involving all the different people on all the different teams. And you've got to communicate. I get it. But think about your meetings critically. Are they really necessary? And is everyone who's invited really necessary to be there? Some ways to make sure that you're not over meeting filling. Designate a couple of days a week or a certain chunk of the day where no meetings may be scheduled. I don't know what works for your team. You'll have to figure that out. Is it better to have, no one is allowed to schedule a meeting on a Monday or Wednesday? Or is it better that no one may schedule a meeting after 2? I don't know. But designate some times where no meetings are allowed. Now, if you say no one can hold meetings on Monday or Wednesday, you know how that's going to play out. Tuesday and Thursday are going to overfill, right? Wrong. It doesn't have to be that way. That's not the future we have to have. One of the ways you can cut down on frivolous meetings is have an agenda. Put it in the meeting invite and stick to it rigidly. So if you're having a 30-minute meeting, it ends at 30 minutes. And if that agenda says that you're going to discuss problem A for 5 minutes, at 4 minutes, 45 seconds, stop. Write down whatever still needs to be discussed, parking lot it, move on. That agenda makes it so that people who legitimately don't need to be in that meeting don't waste their time going. It makes it so that people who genuinely need to be there know it and can prioritize it, and they know what to expect. When you're parking lotting ideas that haven't been addressed because you're rigidly adhering to a schedule, that helps inform the agenda for other meetings and keeps things a little bit more structured. So you're still going to have meetings. Meetings are important. But you can limit how many, you can limit when they happen, and you can make sure that every meeting has a specified purpose and everyone knows what it is, and people can work to keep it in the time frame that it's supposed to be. That'll help a lot. Planning. Is your planning just enough? Is it adaptive and continuous? Okay, so one of the things that sort of, I think, trips people up about planning is planning too much. So as a parent, you learn very quickly that if you don't do any planning and you throw your kids into the minivan and go on an adventure, it doesn't end well. An hour of planning to pack a diaper bag, grab a change of clothes, because as a parent, we're always like inexplicably sticky, crumb covered, or freaking moist. It's just pack a change of clothes, get some snacks, some water. That hour of planning where you're going, what you're doing, what you might need saves you an all-day headache. I'm not saying planning's bad. The problem with planning comes in when you're planning way too much. So instead of planning out this feature all at once, break it down and maybe plan 3 chunks out. That way, especially if you have to shift in the middle of feature development, you haven't wasted time and days of your life planning all the way out to the end of the feature. You're doing just a few sprints ahead. You know the end goal, but that end goal could shift. It could change based on that constant feedback loop we talked about earlier. Your planning needs to always benefit the development work. So like one of the horror stories that was so bad was someone shared that basically because of the planning requirements, especially around tickets, this person and their teammates spent 2 full work days filling out tickets for a set number of tasks. That third day, as a team, they each grabbed however many tickets and got to work. An hour later, they had finished all of those tickets. Now, I don't know what the work was. I do feel strongly that if it takes you 1 hour to do the work necessary to complete things that took 2 days of ticket writing, that's insanity. That's too much planning, right? So don't be so rigid in your planning structure that there's no room for a little bit of common sense and trust in your teammates when they say, hey, this is a real small problem. I feel like I can just sort of like fill out a little bit and this is a small thing. That's how you keep your planning a little bit less intense. And also just constantly, if you're planning smaller chunks, you're planning more frequently, so you're spending less time more often. but it's more on target. There's a little less chance that you'll be planning for things that are never going to happen because of shifting requirements. Okay, so this is a big one. Have you ever been on a team where someone says, well, that's not my job? I haven't. I'm lucky. I work with some fantastic people, but lots of horror stories about basically, well, I'm a back-end engineer, but I don't have any interest in learning how to do anything else. This sort of mentality is not how teamwork works. Now, I'm not suggesting that someone who's been, writing Python their whole career suddenly, cross trains with the design team. But cross training on things that are at least tangentially associated with what you do is how you add value to your team. This great article, I'll share the links in the comments. Great article I was sent on T-shaped people. The basic theory being that I-shaped people are subject matter experts in one area. And generalists are just kind of, their skills are like small and close to the ground and spread out, and how you kind of want to be a T-shaped person. You want to have that one main area of expertise, but then a little bit of knowledge in a bunch of other things. The consequence to having all experts and people who specify this is what I do is that you sort of have to demand level or sort of synthetically limit what your team can deliver based on the confines of who's on the team and what they're willing to do for work. If you have a bunch of people who, they're really good at that one thing, but they also know a little bit about a lot of other things, and they're willing to cross-train with other people to learn new skills, it really opens up the offerings you can provide. It eliminates bottlenecks in the process. You don't have to wait as long for someone who's an expert to come in. If someone knows a little bit and they can get started, that's cool. Analyze your team. Are people willing to learn new skills? I am so lucky. I work with humans who, anytime we say, hey, this thing needs to be done, there's always people saying, I'd like to learn a new skill. I don't know how to do that, but I'd love to learn. It's amazing. And it makes everyone feel like the team is working together and no one's, being drug along and forced to work. It's a great thing to implement. So really look at your team and encourage people to cross-train and learn new skills, and then give them the resources they need to learn those skills. And this is really it. This is what we're getting down to. Do you regularly analyze how your team is doing and make changes accordingly? So you just spent the last however many minutes being asked questions. You've been thinking about your team. How are we doing? What do we need to change? Now you have to actually make those changes. And then you need to ask these questions again and again and again on regular intervals. I always compare this to what happens in the US every New Year's. People critically analyze their behavior as far as eating sugary sweets and drinking alcohol for the last 2 months. It starts at Halloween here, and we're pretty much just drunk and sugared up after Halloween until New Year's. And so we critically analyze our behavior, realize we've gained a bunch of weight, and say, okay, we've got to make a change. And then we don't make a change. In fact, I don't make a change. Some people buy gym memberships, but they don't actually go. And I'm certainly not going to drink less. So it's the same thing. Why would you see that you need to make a change, buy a gym membership, and not go? Why would you critically analyze your team, figure out how you could be more efficient, and then not implement those changes? Much like we talked about, no big feature releases. Let's do small increments of change. Don't make a bullet point list 20 items deep and just attack it in one day. Pick one thing that you identified during this talk and try to modify that one thing, and then take a step back and, okay, how's this working? We did this for one sprint. Did it make it better or worse? Oh, it made it better? Cool. Next bullet point. Let's implement another change. Iterate through how you're doing with your team. I want nothing more than for every single person who sees this talk to reach out to me in the coming months and say, hey, I took this one piece of advice that you gave and I implemented it on my team. And here's how it's changed our process. And here's the time that we've gotten back with our families. And here's the palpable change in job satisfaction that came from it. I hope every one of you out there can take this advice, use it. I cannot wait to hear that it's helped you. And I'm really thankful that you chose to use this time to listen to me speak. Until next year, I'll see you.